Hi, I'm Helen Bauer, and this is the Heart of Hospice podcast. The Heart of Hospice podcast is your source for compassionate and informative discussions about hospice and end-of-life care. I'm a certified hospice and palliative care nurse with over 15 years of experience. Whether you're a caregiver, someone with a serious illness, or you simply need to know more about hospice care, this podcast is for you. Join me as we explore all the aspects of hospice, from the details of caregiving to the emotional and spiritual dimensions of end-of-life journeys. For more resources and to connect with me, visit theheartofhospice.com and find us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Keep listening for today's episode.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
This episode is being sponsored by Halo Care. Whether you're supporting an aging parent or planning for your own independence, Halo Care empowers you to live confidently at home. From personal care and home safety to meaningful social connection, Halo Care gives you peace of mind knowing someone's always there. Learn more at halocaregroup.com/USA or check the show notes for the link. Halo Care, where technology meets compassion and home feels like home.
Voluntarily stopping eating and drinking is legal in every state in the United States. My guest, Kate Christie, has written a practical handbook to support anyone considering the use of VSED. Kate Christie is the author of 21 books, including the VSED Handbook, a practical guide to voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. Kate spent 2 decades working in technical writing, marketing, and communications before she quit her job to spend more time with her family and to support both her parents at the end of their lives. Kate's parents have since died, and she honors their memory by working with VSED Resources Northwest. It's a nonprofit advocacy group. Their work is to spread awareness of voluntarily stopping eating and drinking as a legal way to hasten death in the face of terminal illness. You can connect with Kate Christie at katejchristie.com. You can also purchase your copy of Kate's book, The VSED Handbook, a practical guide to voluntarily stopping eating and drinking, on Goodreads and Amazon, and you can connect with VSED Resources Northwest at vsedresources.org. This is a really personal, intimate look at Kate Christie's experience with her parents and their utilization of VSED. She's sharing their story. Her parents' names are Dick and Jane, and Kate shares a lot about their disease processes and her mom's decision to utilize VSED. Kate's mom had determined that there were certain, Kate called them markers, that would indicate that she was ready to use VSED. She was going to avoid end-stage disease process by utilizing VSED. Kate details how using VSED for her parents affected her as a daughter emotionally and how she is carrying her mom's legacy forward. Voluntarily stopping eating and drinking isn't very widely understood. So I would encourage you to please keep listening all the way to the end of this episode. There's a lot to learn. Kate, it's so great to have you on the show. Welcome to the Heart of Hospice podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm really glad to be here.
You know, you're unique when it comes to my guests because we have over 600 episodes. I have over 200 interviews that I've done with people, and I probably have met maybe 5 of my guests in person.
Wow, that is not a lot of people.
It isn't in the big picture of all the folks that I've talked to. And you and I actually met in Washington State at the hospice conference there.
Yeah, we were both there doing exhibits at the conference.
Yeah, that's unusual. I didn't think about that. Well, it's great to talk to you after we got to meet in person. So I am going to open with an icebreaker question that I want to ask you. We're going to jump right into end of life because, right, this is all we talk about on the show. Yep.
Yeah.
I want to ask you to share something about your advanced care plan.
Oh, my advanced care plan. We met with an attorney after we had kids and set up all of our kind of plans. And for me, I do not want to linger if I have any sort of brain death. I don't want to be kept alive. I don't want any of that. And so I've been very open, talked to my family physician who I've been with for 20 years. And so we're very clear about if I'm not coming back, I want to be released. And so that's kind of the biggest part of my advanced care plan at this point in my life.
It's nice to have clarity about something like that.
Absolutely.
In an advanced care plan, yeah. Because you know from working with your parents and with VSED Northwest that it's not always cut and dried, and there's a lot of emotion tied to creating an advanced care plan when you start thinking about those end-of-life wishes. So to be able to have a piece of it that you say, definitely, I do not want this, that's kind of nice, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. And I've learned so much through working with VSED Resources Northwest, and honestly through the journey with both of my parents who did VSED. My former boss at the university here, who I worked for many years, when I left my job, it was because my mom was nearing the end of her life, and I really wanted to spend time with her. And also I had young children, and I felt like I was just missing out. And so I explained to him, this is why I'm leaving this very nice job. And he said, the last thing that our parents teach us is how to die. And I thought, yep, that is exactly what's going on here. And I learned so much from them about planning in advance, really, for what could come at the end.
The last thing our parents teach us is how to die.
And either well or badly. Or somewhere in between.
Or how not to, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, how to do it well or how things to avoid.
Yep.
Yeah, it's like those lists you see, 10 things you don't want to do when you die.
Yeah, right.
10 things you don't want to happen when you die. So you've written a book. You talk a lot about your experiences with your parents. Introduce me to your parents. Tell me your mom's story.
Yeah, so my parents were Dick and Jane. And of course, we did have the dog named Spot because that was required.
It's a match set.
Yeah, right. They met when they were 19 and they got married at 20. And so they were together for 55 years. And they were lifelong outdoor enthusiasts. They were bird watchers. They loved to hike. And I like to say all of this, like what they liked and who they were, because their VSED story is just one part of their life story. And they both were staunch supporters of people having decision-making choices at the end of life. But they also loved life, and they didn't really want to leave life. And I think sometimes there's this idea that people who do VSED or MAID are doing suicide, are committing suicide. And it's just a really different situation. And in my family's experience and in my work with VSED Resources Northwest, this nonprofit, it's just, they didn't want to die. They loved life. They just didn't want to live to the end stages of their diseases. So, yeah, Mom had Alzheimer's, and she died in 2020. And then Dad had Lewy body dementia and died at the late fall last year, 2024. But yeah, they both were very independent and had no intention of living to the end stages of a disease that would rob them of cognition, of memory, of the ability to feel emotions, of their knowledge of their family and their loved ones. They set a pretty hard limit on that.
So if your mom died in 2020, had the pandemic already started?
Oh my God, her timing was so good. She chose to start VSED, so stop eating and drinking, on February 1st.
About a month before the country shut down.
Yeah, yep, exactly. And she had beginning stages of COPD, so chances are, and our family was exposed to what our doctors decided was probably the first strain of COVID in the wild, as they called it. There was no ability to test for it, but we had a birthday party for our older daughter at the end of February, and a family who had just been traveling in California. It turned out they were coming back from the epicenter in California,
Oh, wow.
and they were very sick. And in fact, one of the family members ended up in the hospital with this strange double pneumonia that she almost died from. And they brought it to the birthday party, and we all got sick, very sick. So I think if my mom had been around, she would have probably died from COVID.
Yeah, so she was high risk.
High risk. Yep.
Wow. Wow. And of course she had no inkling. None of us really did that things were going to get as
No.
bad as they did.
No.
So her timing was just based on her, not on any
Fortune.
external factor.
It was so fortunate, yeah. She made the decision the previous year that she'd met her markers. And my parents had worked for years to kind of figure out, at what point will it be the right time for her to let go? She was told in September of 2019 that we needed to limit the time that we were spending with her. The kids were getting her agitated, which happens with dementia. It's kind of an energy situation, and their energy was activating her dementia and making her very agitated and confused. And she was doing that thing that people with dementia do, which is sundowning.
Yes.
Are you familiar with that? Yeah.
Yes.
Where at the end of the day, everything gets harder, the processing, and so she was having a lot of agitation. And so basically my parents realized we can't have the quality of life that they'd had, and she was going to need to go into memory care. And she said, okay, that's it. I'm doing VSED, and we're going to do one more holiday season. And that happened to be the holiday season right before the pandemic. So,
Wow.
yeah.
So your mother basically had a directive or had given instructions that when these markers, you call them, where these particular milestones or circumstances were happening, then she was ready for VSED. What were the markers that she chose? What were the things that she prioritized?
Yeah, it's so funny because to talk about it in hindsight encapsulated into a simple sentence of she chose these markers.
Right.
My mom first learned about VSED at the end of 2016. She died in 2020, so that was a 3+ year period where planning was done and decisions were made. And the initial planning period was 2016 to 2017. My parents attended a palliative care institute at Western Washington University. They had this really cool program, workshop, a 3-day program called Death Happens. And it was the fall of 2016. And Phyllis Schachter, who is the author of a book called Choosing to Die, that is a much longer book than mine, and it's a memoir of her experience with her husband, Alan, who decided to do VSED to escape Alzheimer's. Phyllis, spoke at this conference, and my parents learned at that conference that people with Alzheimer's and other dementias are not typically able to qualify for medical aid in dying. And my parents were kind of surprised because they thought that that would be an option for them. But then they found out about VSED from Phyllis, and my mom came home from that conference and was like, that's it, I'm doing VSED. And we're all like, okay, I don't know what that is, but we're going to support you through that.
So you had not heard of it until your parents came home and told you that?
Never. I knew that my mother had no intention of living to the end stages of Alzheimer's. Her mother had Alzheimer's. Her mother languished, as we would say in our family, for 7 years in memory care.
Oh,
Everything
wow.
broke down. Yeah, she didn't remember anyone by the end. She didn't remember herself. She had been a teacher. She had been a voracious reader. She loved her family, and she was just gone. And for years, she was not present in her life. And my mom said, I won't do that. If you put me in a memory care institution, I will haunt you. And so I'd known for decades that if she were to, develop Alzheimer's, that she would not go into care. But what do? Right? What's the other alternative?
Yeah.
Most of us don't know anything that we can do that's legal or safe. There's suicide, but that's always risky. And so when she discovered VSED, she was so thrilled that this was something she could do. So we met with an attorney, and we met with some other folks, like a death doula who kind of coached us through. And this was a doula who had experience with VSED. And she coached us through the planning process. I give these presentations, and we say, folks who use VSED are either, number one, in a state that does not offer medical aid in dying, so they could have any terminal illness, right, or they live in a state with medical aid in dying, and I think there's 12 now with MAID. They live in a MAID state, but they do not fulfill the requirements. They don't meet the requirements. And that means you have to be within 6 months of death, and you have to have decision-making capacity. If you have Alzheimer's or another dementia and you are definitely within 6 months of death, you do not have the decision-making capacity anymore.
No.
And so this whole planning process that we went through was, how do you decide the right time when you're someone whose body is going to go on, but your mind will not? And so we say markers, and we're like, yeah, you pick your markers. And so that spring of 2017, my mom was like, okay, so when I can't read, when I can't garden, when I can't hike, and when I can't cook, these are my major, like my quality of life, how I define it, that's when I want to die. And my dad is looking at her with this look like, are you kidding me? Like.
What was he surprised about?
Well, he said, you can't read a book anymore or cook a meal, and I'm supposed to let you die? No, I absolutely refuse. And it got to the point during the spring of 2017, my dad was I think he was really anxious about losing his life partner, understandably.
Yeah.
They met as teenagers. He had gone to Vietnam and come back, and she was his rock. And he grew up in a pretty troubled situation with an abusive father. His mom died when he was born. He got shuffled around between relatives. And so for him, my mom was his person. And here he is having to consider letting her plan her own death and participating in it. Super big challenge for him. And we ended up in the spring of 2017 having filled out all the paperwork, advanced directives, talking to the attorney, setting it aside because my dad just couldn't handle it.
So it wasn't the VSED part of it, which we need to say that we're acting as if everybody knows VSED, and I guess we should just say voluntarily stopping eating and drinking, which is legal everywhere in every state in the United States. So he didn't really have so much of a problem with the VSED part, but just it was anticipatory grief.
I think that was the majority of it. He also was worried that she would suffer horribly through, you hear about it, you're like, dehydration. The first time I thought about it, I was like, I don't think I want to be part of this. This sounds terrible. Mm-hmm. Having now gone through it and been at the bedside throughout the process for both of my parents, there was very little pain, and I would say no suffering. I think there's discomfort, but when the body dies, there's always going to be discomfort when you're dying, unless, it's a sudden death. The dying process is not a comfortable process, but pain and suffering, we were able to minimize those. But we didn't know that in advance. We'd never learned about it. We didn't know anything about it. It sounded terrible. So I think he was nervous about that.
I can understand that, especially with something that they didn't really know about. And it's not widely spoken of.
No.
So when people think about stopping food and drink, for one thing, when a person is actively dying and they can't drink anything, it's really traumatic and triggering for a family. We're starving mom to death, or, she's dehydrated. Well, being dehydrated actually releases endorphins. So,
does it?
Yes. So that's actually a comfortable, a biological part of dying that keeps the person from being uncomfortable. And dying itself is not painful. The disease process can be, whatever disease they already have.
Right.
But dry mouth from being
Mm-hmm.
dehydrated is usually where the discomfort comes from. So we do a lot of mouth care.
Right,
So
exactly.
in VSED, that's
The
one of the
mouth
things
care.
that we focus on. Yeah.
Yeah. Mouth care, and then we also have like a cool air humidifier that's right near the head.
To moisten the air.
Yeah, keep the air so they don't dry out. We did a lot of lotion for the body to keep the skin from drying out and trying to keep the person comfortable. And we have tiny little spritzers that don't release a lot of fluid, but will do enough to make the person feel a little bit more comfortable.
Just in the mouth.
Yeah, in the mouth.
Oh,
It's not
that's smart.
because they're like very they don't let out a lot of fluid. The spray is so, I don't know what word I'm looking for here.
Just
It's
like a
just-
fine misty spray.
It's a fine mist. That's exactly. So you can use a fine mist sprayer that does not give enough fluid to extend the dyeing process, but it also does offer some comfort.
Eases things. So
Yeah.
you said your dad had Lewy body dementia. Was
Yeah.
he fully capable when your mother was going through this to understand everything that was going on?
He developed Lewy body dementia probably, I saw the first symptoms in a year or so after Mom died. So he was unaffected during her process.
Got it.
No one really knows with Lewy body dementia when it starts. But he was fine when she was going through all of this. She died at 75 and they were the same age. So he was still in his early 70s. He was still able to hike mountains and go everywhere. And he was still very adventurous. He was part of a hiking club in our area and they'd go up to Mount Baker and all around. And so.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
So tell me about your caregiving role with your mom.
So my caregiving role with my mom early on, because it was such a planning process, I was kind of the keeper of notes and the person who asked hard questions, who I think I was talking to my wife about this and she was saying, you're the kind of person who can sit with a difficult truth and make sure that questions get answered. And so I think for me it was all so theoretical at the time. I could treat it as kind of a curious research project, like what is VSED? How does it happen?
From a distance. Yeah, it wasn't personal
Very
at that
much.
point.
Very much so. And I was honestly in a bit of denial. I talked to my mom's younger sister, who was her best friend, really. So they lived in different parts of the country, but one of them would meet the other one at the airport and they'd have like the same shoes on or the same shirt and they'd never talked about it. Like they were just so in sync.
Were they twins?
No, they were 7 years apart. My mom was 7 years older, but they looked like twins.
Oh, that's
Everything.
sweet.
They were just, yeah, she was great. And she was able to come and be part of the whole planning process. At times she was out here and then when it came time to start, she came for a month. She was retired from being a middle school librarian. And 3 weeks before VSED, the start date that my mom had chosen, I was on the phone with my aunt, who wasn't here yet, and I said, I don't think she's going to do it. And she said, yeah. And I said, she's so addicted to sugar. There's no way she starts this. And she was like, yeah, I could see that too. So I think we were all in this. And obviously this was not the case for my dad 4 years later, because then I'd been through it and I was like, oh, you mean it. Okay, I got it. But with my mom, I was able to really exist in this area of denial, but still moving forward and really helping with everything. During the dying process, so like the week it started, I went for a lot of walks and absented myself from the house. My mom stopped eating on a Thursday, and then the official start date for VSED was 2 days later. She stopped drinking at that point.
Okay.
But that Monday through like Friday, it was so hard for me to be at their house. I was really struggling. And so the planning period went great. The week before was super difficult for me to process and deal with. And then once it started, I was just in. And my mom and I've talked to a therapist about it, and she said, you guys were able to connect in a way that wouldn't have happened if she were in a memory care facility or if she'd died in a hospital. We were in her house. She wanted to shower every day, and she was, without food and without fluid. She was tipping over, and I was like holding her up in the shower, and we were showering together and singing loudly. We always sang together. And we got so much closer in those 10 days. We had like a healing journey. We were both, we're super strong, independent people, and that can be difficult with parenting and being a child. And so we'd had gone through some ups and downs. And also being a lesbian, my mom, I'm the lesbian, not her, she had a hard time with that initially. And so we kind of had some distance in our relationship. And then we came back together. She loves my wife and obviously the grandchildren. But that 10 days, I would say, as a caregiver, I wanted nothing to do with the physical caregiving other than maybe lotion and spritzing. I didn't want to administer medication. I didn't want any of that. But we connected. It was kind of magical and spiritual, and terrible and hard, all at the same time.
Yeah. Sometimes that's where the magic is.
Yeah. Say more about that.
Sometimes when you sit in those spaces that are so hard, it's a lot of people refer to them as sacred spaces, where you have a connection that you would, under any other circumstances, not have. Yes. There are some people that would say, it was a blessing, it was a privilege, things like that. But I think it's because people who are caregivers that face forward and go straight into those things without avoiding it. Mm-hmm. They have an opportunity to do that. Your mother let you do that with her.
Yes, she did.
And you were willing to step forward and do that. There's a lot of benefit that comes from something like that. And if it helps to draw you closer right before she died, that a blessing, a wonderful thing that you get to carry forward. And it's part of the legacy of your mother's story, which is what you're doing, right? You're sitting here and talking about it with me, and you've written about it in your book. Yeah. So really it was just you let yourself have that anticipatory grief time. Mm-hmm. But once the VSED got started, once she started it, she stopped eating and drinking, you were on 100%.
100%.
We're going to take a brief break right here. We'll pick up the conversation with Kate Christie in just a moment.
This episode is being sponsored by Halo Care. Caring for a loved one at home can be both rewarding and overwhelming. At Halo Care, we're here to help you find the balance, combining technology and heartfelt support so aging at home feels safer, easier, and more connected. Our 24/7 Care Hub team is always just a call away, keeping families informed and seniors supported around the clock. From personal care and home safety to meaningful social connection, Halo Care gives you peace of mind knowing someone's always there. Whether you're supporting an aging parent or planning for your own independence, Halo Care empowers you to live confidently at home, surrounded by care that's compassionate, human, and truly personalized. Learn more at halocaregroup.com/USA or check the show notes for the link. Halo Care, where technology meets compassion and home feels like home.
Did you ever have a point where you said, I don't want you to do this? Did you ever have a moment where you didn't agree with it and you wanted her to stop?
Yes, it was on Tuesday. So she stopped eating on Thursday. On Tuesday, I was at the condo very briefly because that's all I could take at that moment. And she was trying to give me all her socks. And she was giving stuff away, She's like, oh, I have really good socks, Kate. You don't have very good socks. I always say that about you. Here, take my socks. And I was like, and for some reason, her trying to hand me the socks, it just triggered something in me. And I got all teary-eyed, and I put my hands on her shoulders, and we're the same height. And I looked her in the eye, and I said, Mom, you don't really have to do this, do you? You don't really have to do this. And she pulled me into a hug, and she held me close, and she said, "Oh, sweetheart, that decision has already been made, and this is the best thing, and I'm moving forward with it." And I went, but you're my mom. And I just started crying, and she held me and like rubbed my back, and she said, "I will always be your mother."
Oh my goodness, Kate. Wow.
I know. And I just was like crying on her shoulder, and she was holding me. And there was a moment during VSED. So we were new to it, and she was probably 2 or 3 days in, and she was sundowning at night, and we hadn't gotten kind of the medication, the lorazepam, Halidol, morphine, whatever. We hadn't gotten it right yet to help her with her evening agitation. And she was asking for food and water, and well, she was asking for Sprite, which was her favorite soda.
Yeah.
And I said no, and I can't do that for you. And she was like, "Well, but," and I just was like, I can't handle this. And I went out and I asked the doula to sit with her, and I went home and I sobbed. And my wife was like, "What happened?" I was like, "I told her no." And I was just like, that moment, I was almost like, I don't know that I can go back. But as I laid in bed, unable to sleep for the next 6 hours, I realized I had other options. I didn't have to say no. I could say yes. And so then the next day when I went back, she asked again, and I said yes, but if I give you a drink or food, then you're doing VSED right now. VSED stops, and you go into memory care. And she was like, "Oh God, don't bring me anything, please. No, I am not going into memory care."
Oh, wow.
And that was it. It would reset for her. And that broke through kind of the dementia agitation, which is, some people who do VSED do not have dementia, right? It is, from what I understand from our work at the nonprofit, and I work with an attorney, Alzheimer's is the leading cause that people choose VSED for which people choose VSED, however you say that grammatically correctly. And people who are physically ill don't have to deal with this as much. And so for my dad, his LBD, Lewy body dementia, he had some cognitive stuff, but it was primarily physical for him. He did not live long enough for the cognitive stuff to get terrible, because he wasn't willing to live through the physical symptoms. And so for him, it was just a very different, he did one time, I was sitting with him and he went, "Hey, did you bring me a burger?" He was joking about it.
But he was kidding. Yeah, he was kidding about
He
it.
was kidding. He wasn't asking for food or water.
Yeah.
And people who are physically ill typically don't. Until later on in the process, dehydration does break down the mind and the ability to, make decisions and think about things as it's going. So that can happen for sure. But for people with dementia, it can be kind of hairy right from the start with remembering what they're doing. And so there are lots of cues that you develop. And we teach people at the nonprofit how to develop the cues ahead of time so that they're not like me going, "Oh my God, I'm
killing my
like
mom.
That.
Yeah.
Right. That horrible feeling.
When what you're doing, just like any other caregiver that is abiding by an advance directive or end of life wishes, you're just following instructions.
Right. And you can know that intellectually and cognitively, but your body can feel it differently.
Yeah, your 8-year-old daughter's heart is still there. Yeah, that was why the socks got to you.
Yeah, that's why the socks.
She was
got
just
to me.
taking care of you. Just taking care of you.
She did take care of me too, because she heard me in the next room crying one night. And she wasn't in her coma yet. It was a day or two before she slipped into a coma. And I came in, my aunt came out to see how, and I was just struggling. Because my mom was dying and I was sad. Sure. And she came out and she was like, "Come see your mother." And so I dried my tears and I came in and I was like, "Hi, Mom." And my aunt said, "She's worried about you." So I came in and my mom said, "Kate, are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, and my aunt said, "She's fine. She's fine. She's just here to see you, Jane. So she's just here." And my mom and I just held this long look and I went, "No, I'm not okay." And she goes, "Come lay down." And I laid down and I had been holding her mostly. And on this situation, I laid down in her hospital bed. She put her arms around me. I put my head on her shoulder and I cried. And I said, "I'm going to miss you so much." And she said, "I'm going to miss you so much." And then we exchanged words of love. And then my aunt left and let us just be together. And by the end of the hour that followed, we were laughing and just telling great stories and really connecting. And so there was that moment where I could have said, "No, I'm fine," but she wasn't. She wasn't willing to let me. She wanted to take care of me.
Well, she wasn't asking you to be anything less than who you are.
Yeah.
She wanted you to be fully yourself with her, which I think is an amazing
Right.
gift to give a family caregiver.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah,
Yeah. And my dad was the same way too. We had a similar experience.
that's
And he
beautiful.
wrapped his arms around, and he couldn't really speak anymore, and he was just petting my hair, and it was lovely.
Wonderful.
They were both my sister-in-law says they were their higher selves. And I think that's true. I think through this 10-day dying process, took Dad 9 days, but they kind of reached this higher self place where they could just be pure love, and I could receive it and I could offer it back. And it wasn't always easy, and it wasn't always like that. Let's not pretend.
Right.
Every moment was a love fest.
Yeah. I mean, you have to get to the realities of it. It is dying.
Yeah. Yeah, it is dying. It is hard. It is loss. It is grief.
So let's talk about the book a little bit, because it's a handbook. It's a handbook for somebody who is interested in this. Who is the book intended for? Who benefits from reading it?
I think people who are making the decision to do VSED, but also their family members as well. Anyone who's a caregiver for people doing VSED. The book, I try to describe kind of, it's right here. I try to describe the phases of VSED. I go into a lot of detail about planning. And I try to tell our family story because I think it's easier to read information if there's a story attached to it. And I'm a novelist and a former technical writer, so I kind of can put those two together.
Yeah, that's a perfect combination.
Yeah, right? It's good for things like this and websites. I do our website for VSED Resources Northwest, and I basically wrote it because it was what I wish I'd had.
Yeah, it was the book that you needed. Yeah.
Yep, it was the book that I needed and couldn't find.
You talked about using an attorney with your mom.
Yep.
To make her wishes, to get them legally documented, find out what was legal for you, to keep the family safe, to make sure there was not going to be any sort of issue. What other advice, what are some of the big points or big guidance points you would offer to a caregiver who's supporting somebody who's interested in VSED?
Well, if I can talk about the attorney just for a second, it kind of segues into that.
Sure.
It turned out that our family attorney happened to be a leading expert on VSED and MAID, and is on the board of End of Life Washington. I know, super big coincidence.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, and so she said something that I think is really helpful for caregivers and family members, as well as the person considering VSED. She said, when my mom approached her and said, "I've just learned about this at this conference, I'd like to do this," she said, if you're going to do VSED, you will have to give up good days to avoid bad years. And I think that advice is something that family members and caregivers kind of need to hear. If you have dementia, this is not for people who don't have dementia, but if you have dementia, eventually you're going to lose your capacity to make decisions for yourself and to choose to die before your disease end stages. And so that was very helpful from the attorney. And that was more psychological than anything. And I think that's probably the hardest thing to handle. And for caregivers to know that this is not a traditional death. Everyone feels guilty when their loved one dies, right? That's part of the process of grief is guilt. There is an added layer of guilt that comes on to this. And so my biggest recommendation for people who are approaching this with a loved one as a caregiver is to hire professional caregivers. If you have, that assumes a financial privilege. Right. But one way of looking at it that, I forget who talked to us about this. One of the people we talked to, many people, a doula, an attorney, the doctors, somewhere along the way, someone pointed out to us, memory care is, in our area, it was $8,000 to $10,000. So you're going to be paying this probably out of pocket. Or,
Right.
we did not have a long-term health insurance plan and for my parents, and we would have been paying out of pocket $8,000 to $10,000 a month. For VSED, I think hiring caregivers, because it was 10 days, we did do 24/7 caregiving with either a nurse or a nursing assistant, that sort of person. So someone trained. We did that for 5 days with mom, and I did it for probably like 7 days with dad because he was so ill. And each time, I think we spent under $5,000 to $6,000. So it wasn't even 1 month in memory care, and it was really helpful for someone to say that to us,
Right.
to kind of get that perspective of, well, you're going to be spending money on care anyway, and if this is the person's choice, then you want to make sure they have good care. For us, having medically trained people who could administer medication, that meant that we could be family members
Mm-hmm.
and focus on that part of caregiving.
Right. You could be the daughter.
We could be the daughter offering care.
Yeah.
And that meant I wasn't administering medication that if I administered too much, she would die. That was really stressful for me. I didn't want to accidentally overdose my mother.
Yeah.
Or my father. I didn't administer any of his medication either. And I could just sit with her and be her daughter, and she could be my mom, and we could say goodbye, and I could, do the hand holding and the conversations, be there when she woke up from a dream and say, well, are you dreaming? And then listen to her dreams of traveling and seeing family members who'd gone before and all of that work that she was doing. And so I think that's my biggest recommendation for family members, is to be a family member as a caregiver, and don't, if you can, hire someone to do the other stuff.
Right. I think that might be a luxury for a lot of caregivers.
Yep.
However, I can certainly see the benefit to it. Did your mom have hospice care?
She did.
She did. Okay.
It was interesting. Our local hospice had not supported VSED before, but my mom's doctor, who she'd had for 5 years at the Senior Health Center here, which is actually run by a Catholic organization, so we didn't know if they would support. We didn't know how involved they would be. He actually said, well, call our hospice and talk to them. And I was like, they're not going to. This is Catholic, organization, and this is a chosen planned death. They're not going to. And he said, you never know until you ask. So we called, and I ended up talking to the nursing manager, and I think it was about October, and she died in February. And they were like, why wouldn't we support this? I know we haven't in the past, but I think it's time that we explore how can we responsibly, legally, and ethically support this, because your mother's going to die and she's terminally ill. Why wouldn't we support this? And so what we found was that the hospice was willing to take her about halfway through the VSED process, because at that point, about halfway through, your organs are in shutdown mode and there's no bringing you back. In the first few days, this is one of the things that my mom found really attractive about VSED, is you can change your mind. You can start it and stop it. And people have done. I believe that in Phyllis Schachter's book, she talks about Alan, her husband, starting and then stopping. And so that's kind of a nice thing. But about halfway through, so 4 or 5 days, your organs are shutting down and there's just no way to reverse it. And so hospice said at that point, she's clearly on her way to death and we can support. And they came in and took over medication amounts. They were only there once a day, but...
Right. But they managed all the meds. Well, she became eligible for hospice.
She became eligible for hospice.
Right. So they could admit her.
Yeah, my dad, it was different because he was a fall risk. He was falling and falling and falling. And I contacted hospice and I said, he does want to do VSED eventually, but he wants to live as long as he can safely. But we're just going to the emergency room all the time. He's dying. He's clearly in his last year of life. So can you? And they came out and evaluated him. And they were like, oh yeah, you're on hospice, dude. Right. And that was such a relief for us.
I think that kind of support is so important, because caregivers need a guide. Mm-hmm. And if you can't have an end-of-life doula, or there's not one available to you, so many people are doing this type of caregiving work at end of life without a lot of support. Rural areas, there are no doulas, hospices are limited. Mm-hmm. If you can add that in, absolutely do that. And also, you're going to get the medications that you need to manage
Right.
the symptoms, anything like that. You're also
Right.
going to get people who know about comfort care, not just medications like Ativan and Haldol and morphine and things like that, but people who know about how to keep the mouth moist, how to
Right.
position the patient for comfort, all of those things. Yeah. And then you
The
get the
positioning.
psychosocial grief support too.
Right, exactly. And that's another thing about VSED. So as someone's dehydrating, their lungs become very dry and the rattling breath. With mom, we did not have a team that was aware of simple positioning things. With dad, the caregiver had experience with it, and she brought in a neck pillow. And every time his rattling breath got worse, she would just move him around, open up the airway. And so that's another huge tip that I have for people with VSED. Make sure you use a neck pillow and other pillows to position the head and open up the airway, because with my mom, it was really, I was sleeping at their condo at the end, and it was almost impossible to sleep because her breathing was so ragged
So
and
loud.
horrible to hear. Yeah, it was just really hard. So with dad, I was grateful that someone knew to just move his head around, and it changed.
Yeah.
And
Something
never
so
saw it
simple. Yeah, that's
something
comfort.
so simple. Yeah.
So you've got a lot of tips and sort of inside information in the book. The VSED Handbook, a practical guide to voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. Where can listeners find the book?
So our website, the nonprofit that I work for, it's VSED Resources. We are trying to spread advocacy and awareness of VSED as an end-of-life option. If you go to the search bar and search on VSED Handbook on our website, you can find there's a blog post that has a link, and there's a small commission that comes back to the group from purchasing it through the website, but while following the link to Amazon. It's also widely available at Amazon. Our local bookstore can order it. I do consignment here, so independent bookstores can also order it. They don't really like to work with Amazon, so they're kind of against that. So your best bet is an ebook or paperback from Amazon. And I highly recommend the paperback because, and this was my wife's idea, she was like, can you put a couple of blank pages that are lined in the back where people can keep their notes? Because we had Post-its everywhere. We had notebooks. We'd pick up and then we'd go to a meeting at a different place and not have it, and put some notes in the phone. I mean, it was just a chaos with our notes. And so I did include a couple pages there. I also include in the book a copy of my mom's VSED statement. And that was our attorney suggested writing out the reasons for choosing VSED. And that is kind of not only something you can share with your physician, something you can share with your family, but also in case authorities are called, if somebody doesn't support the process. There have been neighbors who've called on people and have alleged elder abuse.
Sure.
And so you've got that documentation that says, and so there's a copy of my mom's statement in the back of the book, which I think can be helpful for folks as well.
Very smart.
Yeah. And a timeline. Also, I did add a VSED timeline, and the 6 weeks before it starts. And it breaks down week by week kind of what you need to do. When do you get the hospital bed? When do you contact hospice? Blah, blah, blah. All of that kind of stuff.
Oh, nice. Very practical. I like that. Okay, so I'm going to put a link in the show notes to VSED Resources Northwest and where they can buy the book. Kate, thank you for sharing so much of your personal self, your personal story. Thank you for introducing me to your parents, Dick and Jane. Yeah. The story's very special.
Yeah, thank you for letting me continue to honor their legacy. They wanted people to know that while VSED might not be right for everyone, for the people it is right for, it is a lifeline out of a brutal end-of-life disease process.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Heart of Hospice podcast. Check out our sponsor in the show notes, and please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. We would appreciate it if you would share this episode with your friends and family and anyone who needs to know more about hospice. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.